Yeah, so good evening. Yeah, so today we'll be trying to discuss about the manifest file. So that's most important topic. So what and all we'll be discussing in the manifest file is we'll be discussing what is manifest file, and we'll discuss about this API groups and their versions. Okay, and we'll discuss about the pod template and concept, and we'll be discussing about the deployment manifest file, and we'll be discussing about the replica set relation, and we'll be discussing about the service manifest file. Okay, so first we'll be going with what is manifest file. See, basically a manifest file is a YAML file that, okay, that tells your Kubernetes like what to create, how many to create, and which image you need to use, and how to expose it. Okay, so you can say like manifest is like a desired state of definition of your Kubernetes object. So which means, like, let's say for example, you remember, right, in Ansible we used to write down the YAML files, right? In the YAML files we write down like the complete, no, let's say for example we are trying to no deploy some particular users or groups in a particular system. So what do, you write down in the YAML file, you write down the details, you mention the modules, and you write down same here, right? Same way, according to your Kubernetes also, we have a set of instructions that has to be written inside your manifest file. Okay, so what you can do is, see, the most important thing to create your manifest file is make sure, let's say you need to make sure that, okay, you need to make sure that you can give whatever name. Let's say I can give a name like deployment, or you can give a name for your manifest file. Okay, you can give whatever name you want. Let's say you can give a name like your name itself, like Elvis. Okay, but make sure it should have a meaningful name. Okay, but .yaml extension should be there when you're creating a YAML file. Okay, understood, right? Is it clear? .yml extension should be there
Yes,
when you're
yes.
creating a YAML file. You can give whatever name you want, it's up to you. But .yaml extension should be there. Only then it decides as a YAML file. Okay. Yeah. So now in this YAML file, what and all you can write down according to Kubernetes. So you can write down like, let's say like we have something like API versions. Then we have like kind. Okay, then we have a lot other things to discuss here. But as of now, let's say this inside this YAML file only, we call this YAML file as manifest file. Okay, in Kubernetes, we call this YAML file as manifest file. Okay, so if you want to run this particular manifest file, you just need to run this command, that is kubectl apply -f. -f indicates the file name. Okay, hyphen f indicates the file name. Okay, file name, and that particular file name, whatever the deployment or whatever manifest file you have created, you can just mention, you can give the name here. Understood, right? Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes, yes.
fine. So now what we are trying to look at here is we'll be going with more detail. Like basically, if you look into the manifest file, okay, let's say for example, if you look into the manifest file, especially in Kubernetes, we'll have this four main sections. These four main sections are very, very important. So you need to know about this API version, you need to know about this kind, you need to know about this metadata, you need to know what is the spec. See, basically, let's say we are trying to create a deployment manifest file. Okay, we are trying to create a deployment. So, in deployment, how the structure is going to be is like, so with the help of deployments, we try to create pods. Okay, like how many pods you do it. So, let's say we have a deployment. Okay, you're trying to create a deployment. So, deployment will connect to the replicas. Okay, like how many pods you want to create. So, in replicas, we give like, I want to create 3 pods. So that will connect to the pods. And end of the day, pods will connect to the container. Understood, right? This is how your deployment works. Is it clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so your deployment will connect to the replicas, and your replicas will decide how many pod has to run, and it will start creating the pods, and pods will create the containers into it. Okay, so this is how it actually works. So most importantly, if you look into this Kubernetes manifest file, so first most important thing is API version. So this API version depends upon your object. Okay, it depends upon your object. Okay, what do you mean by object? So your object can be any kind. Okay, it can be deployment. Your object can be deployment. Okay, your object can be like what kind of operations you're going to do. Let's say you're trying to create a deployment. You mention the kind as deployment here. If you're trying to give if you're trying to create a pod, so you'll give the kind as pod. Or if let's say you're trying to create a service, you'll give the kind as service. So end of the day, kind is nothing but it relates the object. Okay, it actually relates the object. So let's say if you're trying to create a deployment, in the kind you'll mention as deployment. If you're trying to create a pod, in the kind you'll define as pod. In let's say you're trying to create a service, in the kind you'll declare as service. Okay, is it clear, right? Okay, and this
Yeah.
API version depends on your object. See, let's say if you're trying to create an if you're trying to create a kind as deployment, so then the API version is going to be like app slash v1. It's going to be something like this. If it is a pod, so it's going to be v1, something like that. Okay, so it depends on, see, your API version completely depends on your object. Is it clear, right? Is it clear?
No, you said your API version depends on your object, or your API's version
Yeah, so
depends
you
on the
can
kind.
see here. So basically, API version, it defines which Kubernetes API is used to create the object. Okay, example, let's say if your object is pod, like let's say you're trying to create a pod. So if you're trying to create a pod, you'll mention the kind as pod. Okay, so for that, the API version would be v1. Let's say you're trying to create a service. Okay, so the API version would be v1 here. Let's say you're trying to create a deployment. So in the kind, you give it as deployment. See, we are trying to create one manifest file, okay? And we are trying to tell our Kubernetes that what we are trying to do here in the manifest file. So I'm trying to create a pod. So what I'll try to do, if I'm trying to create a pod, what should I mention here? So if I'm trying to create a pod, I'll mention the API version as v1 and the kind as pod. See, this pod is nothing but my object. Okay, this pod is nothing but my object. So end of the day, the API version depends on my object.
Yes, yes, that's understood. Yeah.
Understood, right? Now, see, that's what I'm trying to teach here. See, let's say, for example, as I mentioned here, so API version, it defines which Kubernetes API is used to create the object. So let's say if you're trying to create a pod, the API version would be v1. If you're trying to create a service, the API version would be v1. If you're trying to create a deployment, okay, the API version would be app slash v1. Let's say if you're trying to create a replica set, the API version would be app slash v1. Understood, right? So why we are doing this? Because Kubernetes groups objects into API categories. That's the reason. Okay. So why we are doing this? Because Kubernetes groups your objects into API categories. Clear, right? Understood,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we forgot to talk about this metadata and specification. See, metadata is like information about your deployment. So in the metadata, let's say for example, okay, you are what you have done here is maybe you're trying to create the kind as deployment, which means you're trying to create a deployment. Okay. And the API version, what would be the API version would be if it is deployment?
V1.
Huh? Look at here. Deployment means app slash v1. Oh, so sorry. Wait.
App slash V1, yes.
Okay. It
App
is going
slash
to
V1.
be,
That is pod, that is V1, yeah.
yeah, app slash v1. Okay. Yeah. In the metadata, you will write down some information. Like you will write down, like inside the metadata. Okay. Metadata, you will write down these two categories. That is, you'll mention the name of this particular deployment. And next, you'll mention the labels. Okay, labels is like key value pair. I'll explain that. Okay, you'll write down the name of this deployment. Let's say you're trying to create a Nginx deployment. So you'll mention the name of the deployment as Nginx hyphen deployment. You'll give a name, right? It's a name of this particular deployment. Okay, it's just a name of that particular deployment. In the labels, you have to write down the key value pair. So you have to write down the key value pair. Like let's say you can give any kind of key value pair. So I'll be giving a key value pair like app, and I'll be giving lay ML Nginx, something like that. You can give any kind of key value pair. Okay, why are we doing this? That I'll explain slowly, okay? That you'll understand slowly. Why are we mentioning these labels? That you'll understand slowly. Clear, right? See, Why are we doing this? Because, see, end of the day, your deployment has to know, okay, to which pods we are actually trying to create. So it is going to identify only with the help of the labels. Okay. See, you'll get to know. You'll get to know slowly. Okay, you'll get to know. See, let's say we understood what is API version, right? Is it clear, right? Any doubts here?
No, 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 no. That's
Now we'll
clear.
understand about the kind. So you know, right? And kind defines the type of object you're creating. Let's say, for example, you're trying to create a pod. You'll mention the kind as pod. If you're trying to create a deployment, you'll mention the kind as deployment. Let's say you're trying to create a kind. Let's say you're trying to create a service. The kind will be service. You're creating a replica set. The kind will be replica set. So kind tells Kubernetes what to create. Okay, understood, right?
Yes, yes, that's
Okay.
clear.
Next, we have this metadata. See, metadata stores identity information. Just now I told you, right? Metadata stores identity information. Okay, what kind of identity information? It stores like what is the name? Let's say, for example, you have mentioned the kind as deployment. Okay, you told your Kubernetes that, see, I'm going to create a deployment. So now you have to give a name of the deployment, right? That you will write down inside the metadata. Okay, you have to give the name of the deployment, right? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, yes,
Yeah. So I'll just give the name of the deployment as Nginx deployment. And next we'll be mentioning the labels. See, labels is most important factor here. Why I'm telling it's most important? Because, see, end of the day, your deployment has to know, right? Which pod are we going to run? So that is going to be identified only with the help of labels. And who is going to do that? That I'll explain that. End of the day, your selector is going to do that. That will slowly understand how the selector is going to do that. Okay, so you'll slowly understand that part. Okay, now if you observe here, yes, we have the name of the deployment as nginx deployment. See, you can give whatever name you want, it's up to you. Okay, but make sure you give a meaningful name. Understood, right? Is that clear?
yes, yes.
Okay.
So
And
another thing, you said you can give a meaningful any name that you like, but it needs to have a name of an image like Nginx,
yeah,
right?
yeah, you
Okay,
can. This
okay,
for your
yeah,
identify point. Yeah, for identification
yeah,
purpose. Because when you
okay,
try to run kubectl get pods, or when you run kubectl get deployments, you have to. Let's say you are running. You have run like four or five manifest file. Okay, in that four or five, maybe two files are deployment files. Okay, deployment kind of files. Okay, in that case, you have to know like what deployment we have done. Let's say if you have done nginx. Okay, you mean you are running nginx pods. So you have given some nginx hyphen deployments. Okay, maybe in another case you would have run Apache. Okay, so Apache hyphen deployment. So when you're trying to run, let's say when you're trying to run kubectl get deployments, okay, make sure it should be a unique name. Okay, make sure it should be a unique name. Then only you can identify, okay, so I have run this deployment. Because when you run this kubectl get pods, you'll have a clear picture. Okay, you'll understand this. You'll understand why we are telling to give a unique name. Okay, that you'll slowly understand. Okay, right now you don't need to get any kind of confusion. Got it right? Is it clear?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's clear. I get it.
Okay, okay, fine. Now, what I'm trying to explain here is, we understood this. We understood what is label, right? So, label is for making your deployment to understand that which pod we have to run. Okay, that who is going to do that? That selector will be doing that. That will slowly understand. Okay, so in the fields inside this metadata, what and all fields would be there? So you will have a field in the name called name. So that defines your object name. Then next you will have the label, the key value tags. Okay, then next you can mention the namespace for making your isolation. I mean, like your yeah, deployment into a separate isolation. So namespace, I'll explain. When we go to namespace, you'll slowly understand what is namespace. Okay, then you can add some extra annotations like, okay, extra metadata and all. That's up to you. Okay, but this is enough. Okay, when you're trying to run a deployment, this is more than enough. Okay, understood, right? Is it clear?
Yes, yes. It's
Okay.
good.
See, one more important thing. Labels are very important for service and selectors. See, this is very important. Okay, labels are very important for services and selectors. What is the selector? I'll just explain in a short while. See, next important thing is we have the spec, right? We have the spec. So, spec is like specification. You define the specification of this particular deployment. Okay, what do you mean by specification? Yes. So inside the specification, we have a lot of fields here. We have fields like replica set. See, inside this, let's say, right, we are creating a deployment. Okay, we are trying to create a deployment. How many replica set we need? Whether like we need to create 3 pods or we need to create 4 pods. How many copies of pods you want to create? So that we'll mention inside the specification. Inside the spec, we write down that. Okay, replica set. How many replicas we need to create? So we just mentioned that part. Okay. Then next we'll mention the selectors inside the specification. Why we need to specify this selectors? Because end of the day, your selector is the one who is going to communicate to your deployment, telling which are the pods that you are going to run. So how it is going to tell according to the labels, according to your labels, because the selector will have something like match labels. Okay, whatever that match labels tags they have, let's say the match label is having a tag like app colon nginx, and even your deployment also has the same labels, app colon nginx. Let's say for here also we have this like app colon nginx. So if so what happens here is basically end of the day your selector is going to communicate to the pod, and your selector is going to tell your deployment that these are the pods that we are going to run. I'll slowly explain. You don't need to get any kind of confusion. You'll get to know when I write a deployment file. No, you'll slowly you'll understand. Okay. Yes. So now if you look into the spec, so this is the main configuration section. It defines containers, replicas, pods, policies, volumes, all the details. Okay. Every object has a different spec structures. Okay. Let's say, okay. Let's say for example, mm, one second. Let's say for example, okay, you are trying to run your kind. Let's say they have mentioned, every object has a different spec structure. If let's say if your object is like deployment, you'll have a different specification. Okay, if your object is like service, you'll have a different specification. Okay, so that is what they mean here. Every object has a different spec structure. Okay, now let's say we are going with deployment. Okay, let's say our object is like deployment. Okay, our kind is deployment. So when you're trying to create a deployment file, what you need to understand here, see, as I told you, the most important thing. So what are the 4 components always we need to discuss here? We need to discuss about the API version, kind, metadata, and spec. These are the 4 important part. One, two, three, four. Okay, so I told you, right, according to your object. So what is your object here? See, let's say for example, you're telling your Kubernetes that, hey, I'm going to create a pod. So what you'll do, you'll go inside this manifest file. I told you, you can give whatever file name you want, but make sure .yaml extension should be there when you're trying to creating a manifest file. Okay, when you're trying to create a manifest file, .yaml extension should be there. Okay, that is very very important. Okay, yeah, then only your Kubernetes will listen to this particular file and start run the operation according to it. Okay, now one more important thing, inside the manifest file, how do we write down? So the very first thing is we need to write down the API version. See, your API version completely depends upon the object. I explained, right? What is this object? See, object is nothing but you tell your Kubernetes that what kind of operation you're going to do. Let's say I'm trying to create a deployment, or I'm trying to create a pod, or I'm trying to create a service. Okay, or I'm trying to do any other like creating a volume. So you tell your Kubernetes that what you're going to do. Let's say in my case, I'm going to tell my Kubernetes that, hey, I'm going to create a deployment. So yeah, I'll mention in the kind. So in the kind, you need to tell like what object you're going to create. So in my case, I'm going to create a deployment. So according to your object, you need to specify your API version. Let's say, for example, if you're trying to create a pod, okay, if you're trying to create a pod means according to your object, let's say my object is pod. So my API version would be V1 here. Let's say if it is deployment, okay, my object would be app slash V1. Okay, so if you want to understand more details, guys, anyway, I have explained this clearly. Okay, you can just scroll up. I mean, you can go to the documentation, you can understand here. So, if in case if your object is a pod and the API version should be V1. In case if your object is service, the API version should be V1. In case if your object is deployment, the API version should be app slash V1. In case if your object is replica set, so the API version should be app slash v1. So why are we doing this? Because Kubernetes groups object into API categories. That's the reason. Okay, that's the reason. Okay, understood, right? Okay. Now, if you observe here, so I explained this, right? So, what is the first thing we need to look at here? The first thing when you're writing a manifest file, always you need to look into the API version. Second is your, sorry, second is your, second is your kind. Third is your metadata, and fourth is your spec. So these are the four important factors that is needed. Okay, yeah. So first, I told you what is this API version is going to do. So API version completely depends upon your what kind of object you're going to create. So the object, let's say if your object is deployment, it's going to be app slash v1. Okay. So kind is going to tell your Kubernetes that what we are trying to create. Like if you're trying to create a pod in the kind, you need to mention as pod, or if you're trying to create a deployment, you have to mention as deployment. It's it's up to you. Okay, so yeah, next we need to mention the metadata. So just now I explained, right? Metadata stores the information about your deployment. Like what kind of information? So it stores the identity. Metadata stores identity, like what is the name of your particular deployment. So make sure you give a valuable name here. Why? Because make sure you give a unique name also. Why? Because let's say you're trying to create one more YAML file or one more manifest file with the kind called deployment, and if you're giving same name, definitely it's not going to, you'll be getting confused. Okay, so why do we have to create a chaos? So that's the reason we always go with the unique name. So whatever the pod you're going to create, make sure you give it that name only, nginx hyphen deployment. Okay, follow the hierarchy properly, that's it. Okay, and we have something like labels. What do you mean by labels? See, end of the day, what happens here is your deployment has to know which pods are we running. So how will it will come to know that? It will only come to know with the help of this label. So labels are kind of tags. It's a kind of tags. Okay, so basically this label will have like key value pair. It will have a key value pair. Understood, right? It will have some key value pair. Okay, yes. And we have something like spec. So spec is nothing but a specification of your object. Let's say I have created my object as deployment. So according to deployment, I'll have a different specification. Let's say if your object is like pod, according to pod, you'll have a different specification. Let's say if your object is like service, according to your object will have a different specification. So your specification, I mean your specification varies according to your objects. Okay, clear, right? I hope this should be clear. Is it clear? Is it clear? Any doubts,
Yeah.
guys?
No, it's clear for me.
Okay. Now, what you need to understand here? What you need to understand here? So, inside the spec, we are telling. See, end of the day, the beauty of using deployment is all about the replicas only. Okay. So, okay. So, what happens here is inside the specification. First, we'll mention the replicas. Like how many pods we need to create? Three. We need to create three copies. Okay. So, what happens? Okay, what happens here is in future, okay, let's say three pods are running. Okay, so if any one goes down also, ultimately it will recreate. That is the beauty of this particular deployment. Okay, that's the beauty of this particular deployment. So deployment will have this particular option as replicas. Okay, inside the specification, yes.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, inside the specification, we have something like replicas. So replicas will create the copies, how much you specified here. Let's say I've created three, so it will create three copies of pods. Okay, so if one particular pod goes down also, it will recreate it. It will make sure three pods are running. Suppose if the entire node itself goes down, then it will reschedule it. Okay, it will reschedule it. Okay, yeah. So until unless your node is up, it'll wait and it'll reschedule it. Understood, right? Is it clear? Okay, fine.
Mm.
Yeah. So next we have something like selector. See, this is the most important factor here. You need to understand here. See, why I'm telling about selector, because see, end of the day, how will your deployment will come to know that, hey, how many pods have to we run? Which pods we have to run? So how will your deployment will come to know? How will my Nginx deployment will come to know that which pods do we need to run? So it all comes to know with the help of this selector. So in the selector, we have something like match labels. See, make sure this match label, what it is going to do is whatever the label that you have specified here, okay, the same label should be even specified in your template as well. Okay, in the template, you have these labels, right? You'll understand this. You'll understand this. See, this labels is for the pods. So this label is for the pods. Okay, so now what happens is your selector will connect to your pod. Okay, so and it will tell to your deployment that, hey, these are the pods that you have to work. How will it come to know? See, even in your deployment also, we have these labels. Make sure whatever the value you have given here, right? Whatever the tags value you have given, no, make sure it should be same here. It should be same in all the three. Okay, so in selector is the one who is going to tell your deployment that which are your pods. Understood, right? So and we have something like template here. See, this inside the specification only you have selector and template, that you need to understand. Make sure this is very important. Okay, I mean, you understand this properly. Okay, so inside this selector only, inside the specification only, you have selector, you have template, you have one more specification. Okay, that is a configuration inside a configuration. Okay, so what you need to understand here is how will my deployment comes to know which pod I have to run. So it will only come to know with the help of labels. So end of the day, your selector, okay, will actually match the labels. Selector will actually match the label. So whatever the label that is been, so template is actually a blueprint. Okay, it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint of your pod. Okay, like which pod are we running? Okay, and what is that container name? All that detail. So inside, okay, because inside the template only, right, we have this spec, right? Inside the template only, we have this metadata and spec. Okay, so the template will give you the blueprint of the pod. Is it clear? Any doubts till now? Any doubts till now? Is it clear?
Why do we need a template when we already have a deployment up?
Sorry, I didn't get you. Sorry. Why do we need?
Why do we need a template when we already have a deployment up?
No,
It
no, no.
looks to
That is
me
what.
it's
That is
it.
what. See, template is like a blueprint of a pod. Okay, so it tells you that what you have to do. I mean, which pod we have to run. Okay, which pod have to run. See, basically, this all comes under a specification. Okay, under specification only you have this replicas. Under specification only you have the selector. Under specification only you have this template. So these are all mandatory fields for your deployment. Okay, these are all the mandatory fields for your deployment. Understood, right? See, inside the spec only you have the template. So which means your deployment. So end of the day, your deployment will come to know that which pod we are going to run, like with the help of this template. Okay, I mean it will come to know with the help of the selector only, because selector only tells your deployment that which are your pods, but template will give you the blueprint of the pod. Like blueprint in the sense like what pod are we running? Like okay, for example, what pod it is, and what are the containers that we are going to run inside it. All that it is going to tell you. So let's say for example, if you want, you can observe here. Okay, so if you look at the fields, so inside this, okay, we have replicas. Inside the what? Inside the spec, we have this field called replicas, okay, which means how many number of pods copies we are going to create. Okay, how many pods you want running. So totally I want three pods. So Kubernetes ensures that three pods are always running. If one dies, new pod will get created. Okay, if a node fails, the pod will get rescheduled. Okay, so replicas defines how many copies of your application should run. So end of the day, we have this selector. So how deployment finds pods? So selector, in selector we have match labels, and in the labels we have like app nginx. It's a tag. Okay, meaning the selector tells deployment which pod belongs to me. Okay, it matches the pod labels. Okay, example, let's say if a pod is having a label, okay, so inside the template only we have this. If you observe here, let's say inside the template we have the metadata. Okay, inside the metadata we have this labels. Inside the labels we have this app nginx. Okay, so end
So
of the day,
yeah, my question was, right up we have API version, then we have deployment, then we have metadata, then we have spec.
hmm.
So why are we still having template? Because template still have
No, with the
everything.
no
You
no
said
no.
it's a blueprint, right?
That's what these are all specification controls. Okay, see, we need to have template. Without template, how will you create a pod? Because inside template only, no, we have this spec for creating containers. You're getting right. See, template is for blueprint. It's a
Oh,
blueprint
okay,
of the
okay,
pod.
I get it now. So all the things that you listed from above, from the API, the deployment, the
Hmm.
metadata. So without the template now communicate now with
Yeah.
those things up. Okay,
Yes. Yeah. That is what
okay.
the specification of the deployment is going to do.
So we have spec two times, then template now is like the blueprint of what you want to
Yes.
deploy,
So
like you
inside
said.
the
Okay.
template only, yeah, we have the spec. Yes. It's a blueprint
Okay.
of the pod. So it is going to tell like what is that container that we are going to run, name of the container and the image, all the detail on which port number it has to run. The entire detail will be stored. Okay. So understood, right?
Yes. It's understood.
Okay. Yeah. So what you need to understand here is see inside spec only we have this replicas. Okay. So this is the specification of your deployment. Okay. So yeah. So inside spec only, we have even the selectors. So with the help of this selector only, okay, with the help of this particular selector only, my deployment comes to know that which pod I'm going to run. How it comes to know? That is there inside the template. Inside the template, we have this app nginx, right? So the selector is going to match the labels. It is going to match the label. So okay, here also we have nginx. So it is going to check wherever this app nginx is there. Okay, so which means the deployment has to run this particular pods. Okay, which means the deployment has to run this particular pods. And what is that pod? Yes, it is over here. Okay, it is over here. Understood, right? Is it clear?
Yes, it's clear now. Thank you.
What about others? Okay, no problem. Fine. So now what are we discussing here is we were discussing about the template, right? So template is like a blueprint. Okay, it's a blueprint of a pod. So it's going to decide like what kind of containers are we running in, and which image we are pulling for that particular container, and what port number that particular container should run. All that details will be stored inside the template. Okay, so template will have a specification. I mean, it'll have a configuration. Okay, that is, see, inside spec only all this template is also stored. Inside spec only we have this replicas. Inside spec only we have the selector. Inside spec only we have the template also. Okay, inside template we are having the spec. So which means you need to understand. So template is the one, it is useful for setting up the blueprint for your pod. Like what kind of, see, end of the day, inside the pod you'll have a container, right? So what container you are going to run and what port number it has to run, all the details will be specified over here. It's clear, right? Okay, so if you slowly understand here, I would have explained about this. Okay, so selector is like for how deployment finds pod. So selector is like match labels. I mean, selector will have a match labels, and match labels will have a label like app nginx, meaning selector tells deployment that which pod belongs to me. It matches the pod labels. Okay, example, if a pod has a label like app nginx, inside the template you can see, no? Inside template we have metadata. In the metadata we had this labels. Inside labels we had app nginx. So what it is going to do, then deployment manages this. If label don't matches, then deployment ignores it. See, this is very very important. Let's say if the labels are different, let's say if it is not app nginx, then your deployment will start asking your selector that, hey, where is that particular pod, which pod I have to run. Now even your selector will start searching for the pod. If that particular match label is not similar of what your deployment is having, okay, then definitely your selector can't find it, then your deployment is going to ignore this kind of pods. Okay, so make sure it should have the same labels of what your deployment is also having. Okay, understood, right? So my deployment is having the label as app nginx, means even inside the template it should have the label as app nginx. So then only my selector will match this particular label up to my deployment, that these are the pods that you have to run. Understood, right? Is it clear? Is it clear, guys?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. See, this is very, very important. That's why. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Now, if you observe here, now we'll come to know that. See, I was telling here, no? So that is what they're meaning here. Example like if a pod is having a label like app nginx, then deployment manages it. And if label don't match, then deployment ignores it. So selector connects deployment to its pod using labels. Understood, right? So what is the function of selector? Selector just connects the deployment to its pods using the labels. And next we have this template. So template is like blueprint. It's very important, guys. See, template means how the pod should be created. Okay, template means how the pod should be created. So deployment uses these templates to create pods. Now you understood, right, Elvis?
Yes, I get it.
Okay, basically
Yeah.
deployment will be using template to create pods. Okay, yeah. So the structure of your template will be like this: template, metadata, and spec. Okay, template will have these two factors, metadata and spec. So inside metadata we need to mention the labels, and we have to give a label like app nginx. So that will be indicating to your selector, and selector will tell your deployment that these are the pods you're going to work with. And spec will write down the container name and the port numbers, all the details. Okay, so in metadata we mention labels, in spec we mention the container configurations. Okay, so if you look at here, template metadata labels, we'll mention like labels as app nginx. So these labels are attached to the pods. Okay, so whatever the label you're giving here, no, inside the template, that labels are attached to your pods. Okay, why needed? Because selector uses them. Then only your selector will tell to your deployment that these are your pods. Create these 3 replicas for these pods. Right? As or no? That is what. Okay. So why needed? Yeah, you understood, right? Why needed? Because selector uses them. Okay. So important rule. Selector labels and template labels must match. Understood, right? Selector labels. Where is that? Selector labels and template label should match. Okay, it should definitely match. Okay, yeah, if it doesn't matches, then you know what is going to happen. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, your deployments will get failed. Okay. So that is what here. So template labels identify the pods created by the deployment. Okay. Yeah. Next, we have the spec inside the template, right? Inside the template, we have spec. So inside the spec, what we write down is we write down your containers information, right? Like what is a container and which one name and what is the image that you have to pull, what port number you have to assign for that particular container, what volumes we need to attach, resources details like how much RAM memory, CPU, all the details you can specify inside the spec. Okay, that spec is stored under which part? It is stored under in your template, and template is stored in your specification of your deployment. Understood, right? Is it clear? Okay, I hope this should be clear here. Okay, now let's say, for example, okay, I have created one manifest file. So during the installation time, I have created this deployment file, right? You understood, right? What are we trying to do here? Is it clear? Any doubts here, guys? Any doubts here? Any doubts here?
No.
See, very simple concept. No, not that much difficult also. See, we are creating one manifest file, okay? Deployment.yaml. So when you're trying to create a manifest file, so what are the four important things you need to understand? You need to know about this API version. Second is your kind. Then third is your metadata, and fourth is your spec. See, these are the four important components. Okay, these are the four important components. Okay, so you know, right? According to your object, your API version is going to vary. Let's say you're telling your Kubernetes that I'm going to create a pod. So in the kind, you need to specify as pod. Okay, and in API version, you need to specify as V1. Okay, and we need to write down the metadata of your, like, metadata contains the information. It's an identity of that particular object. Let's say my object is like deployment. So how do I identify is by giving the name. Okay, I'll give the name as Nginx deployment. Okay, I'll give the name as Nginx deployment. Is it clear, right? Nginx deployment. Is it clear? And if you want, you can actually specify. Yes. See, if you want, you can even give label. Labels is like option here. If you want, you can give. If not, yeah, no problem. The make sure, but selector should have that match label, that is app Nginx. Okay, because end of the day, this is the one who is going to communicate to your pod, and it is going to tell to your deployment that hey, these are the pods that you are going to run. Okay, so if you want, inside the metadata also, this is an optional only. Okay, if you want, you can give labels and you can mention. If you don't want, you don't need to mention, but make sure, see, this specification is actually the specification of your deployment. Here we need to have the match label, that is app nginx, and whatever the label we have here, that should match the labels of your pod as well. Only then your selector will tell to your deployment that hey, these are the pods that we are going to run, and we need to create two replicas, I mean two copies. Okay, so if you want, you can mention name and you can mention label also here. Label is optional. Okay, it's not mandatory field here. Okay, so what we have done here is we have mentioned the API version, apps v1, kind as deployment, metadata, and we have given the, in the metadata is for, right, it's for identity. So the name of the deployment, so I'm giving the name of this deployment as nginx deployment. And now we need to specify the specification of this particular deployment. So what are the specification we have, like how many copies you want to create since you're going for deployment. So deployment means is something like uh, maximum, like how many deployments you're going to create. Like for that we'll use replicas. I'm using two, so which means only two copies of this particular pods I'm going to create. Okay, and in the selector I'm going to mention the match label, that is app nginx, and template. So template is like a blueprint of the pod. End of the day, your deployment will be using this template for creating pods, right? So in the template we have this metadata. Okay, and we'll write down the labels. In the labels, should this whatever the label you have mentioned here, no, that should actually match your selector. Okay, that should match your selectors. So then only your selectors will tell to your deployment that, hey, these are your pods. You have to create 2 copies of these pods. Okay, yes. And next, inside the template only, we have the specification, right? Like, see, end of the day, template is for creating pods. So inside pod, we need to create containers, right? So we have to specify. In the specification, we are just going to specify like what are the containers that we are going to create. We are going to create an Nginx container. I mean, we're giving the container name. So basically, this is a container name that you need to understand. Okay, this is the container name. Container name. This is the container name. Okay, and we have to pull the images, right? So end of the day, in your Kubernetes, guys, in your worker nodes, which particular service is going to pull the image? Yes.
Container runtime.
Yeah, container runtime. That is container D, right? Your container D is going to pull the image. Container D or Docker. Okay. Your runtime can be anything. It can be container D or it can be Docker. So he is the one who is going to pull the image. Okay, and what ports it should run. So all these details, see, all these details will be stored in the template. So template is a blueprint of the pod. Understood, right? Yes. And same way we have a service. Okay, so let's say we have something like kind called service. So service is for exposing your pod. Let's say I want to connect to your container. How do I connect? See, when I talk about service, okay, we have like multiple services. I mean, we have like multiple types of services. We have types, multiple types. Like we have like uh, what is that? We have like node node port, I guess. We have like load balancer. Then we have like mm, cluster IP. Okay, so we have this node port, then we have this load balancer, then we have this cluster IP. Okay, slowly you'll understand what is this. See, if you see, let's say right now what I've done using this deployment, I've created 3 pods, right? I've created 3 pods, and inside the pod we are running a container. The pod is creating a container. Now, what I actually wanted is I want to communicate to the pod, because in the container is running an application, like it is running a front end application. Consider it's running a front end application. Okay, now the end user has to communicate to the, I mean, he has to reach that particular application. So how he is going to reach that? So with the help of service, he is going to reach this particular pod or the container or the application inside it. Okay, understood, right? Is it clear? Now when you're trying to create a service, what and all you need to do here? See, let's say, for example, service is also a kind of object. Okay, you know, right? In previously I explained that. Okay, so if you observe here in the service manifest file, what and all you can see here. So basically, we need to specify this API version v1 and kind is service. You know, according to your object only, we need to mention the API version. So my object is service. Okay, and in the metadata, see, that's what every manifest file, okay, will have this 4 important thing: API version, kind, metadata, and spec. So your spec is going to vary according to your object. See, if my object was creating a deployment, my spec was completely different, right? If my object is service, my spec would be completely different here. So now what you need to understand here is, like, right now, we are mentioning that service. Okay, we are creating a service to connect to your pod. So for that, I've just mentioned the kind of service. In the metadata, I've just given the service name as Nginx service. See, one more important thing is this selector. This is very, very important. How will your how will your service will come to know that we have to connect to this particular pod? How it will come to know this part? How it will come to know this part?
through your match selector.
Yeah, it'll come to know only with the help of this selector. See, basically, we have this label called App Nginx, right? When you look into the deployment in the template, we have this metadata, and this metadata was having a labels, and inside the labels, we had this tag like App Nginx, right? So if this and this are same, okay, only if this label and this label matches, only then your service will understand, okay, I have to run this particular service for this particular pod. So who is going to do that? Your selector is going to do that. Your selector is the one who is going to check which particular pod we have to execute this service. Understood, right? I hope this should be clear here. Okay, and next we have inside the specification, you understood, we had type, we had, see, type is going to decide like what kind of type of service you're going to run. So whether it's going to be node port, see, node port means basically we have to use the worker node IP address. Worker node IP address followed by a particular exposing port number that will be starting from 30,000 and ending to somewhere like 32,000 or 33,000. I'm not sure with the ending number. I'll
Mhm.
check it in the, I'll chrome it. Okay. Yeah, okay. So now, yes. What happened, man? Okay. Once again. Yeah. Now, what you need to understand here is, see, according to this object that is service, we have a different specification. Okay, we had type, we had selector, we had ports, because we are trying to create a service, right? So in the service, we need to specify what kind of type of service you are going to create, whether you're going to create a node port, or whether you're going to create a load balancer, or whether you're going to create a cluster IP. So cluster IP, if you use cluster IP, mean that don't get exposed externally. So end user cannot, let's say, if any other public user is there, he cannot communicate to this particular application. Okay, that's not possible. It only, if you're using cluster IP as a type, then only ports to ports communication will happen. That's it. Okay, so make sure you go with load balancer or you go with the node port. So if you're using node port means by default you have to mention the worker node IP address followed by whatever the port number. See, this is the node port. It will be starting from 30,000 to somewhere like, okay, wait, let me check. Node port IP range. Yeah, it will start from 30,000 to 32,767. So within this number you have to give. Only then what you can do is, when you give node port, what will happen? Your pod will be externalized, because node port service will actually help your pod to externalize over the internet. Okay, so the end user is there, he'll give the your worker node IP address followed by whatever the port number you have given, right? Okay, that user had to specify that particular port number. Like if he's giving your worker node IP address like 192.168.12. Whatever the worker node machine IP address is there, followed by the port number, then he can reach that particular pod. With the help of the service, he can reach that particular pod. Okay, now if you observe here, in our case, what did I do here? I just specified, see, you need to understand this. In the port number, I just mentioned the port as 80, which means I'm just telling the end user has to connect to the port number 80. That, I mean, what I'm trying to mean here is, by default, the application is going to run on the port number 80. Okay, and the target port is 80. What do you mean by target port? See, very important thing, what you need to understand here is your target port. Okay, your target port should match your container port. Okay, your target port should match your container port. This is very, very important. So if you look into the deployment.yaml file, let's say for example, you can see here in the ports, okay, in the container is listening to the port number 80, right? So always make sure, guys, when you're giving this container port, make sure you give the application's default port number. So nginx default port number, you can give it as 80. Okay, nginx default port number is 80. So you can better give the container port number is 80. So make sure the target port should be exactly same of this container port. Okay, that is very very important. Okay, so now if you observe here, hmm. So in the port, I've just specified like 80. That is, the nginx will be listening to the port number 80, and it will redirect. Okay, it will redirect to the C. Very simple. What happens here is, whoever user is there, see, whichever user is there, this is very important, you need to understand. Okay, whichever user is there, when you're giving, let's say he wants to connect to, for example, I'm a end user. Okay, end user is there, I'm an end user, I want to connect to this particular pod. I mean, inside the pod we have this container, and the container is running an application. Okay, so what they'll happen, they'll be connecting to the service. Maybe they'll be using a node port service. Okay, they'll be using this service. Okay, with the help of service, we'll connect to the pod. Okay, how do you connect that is very simple. If you're using node port means the end user has to give the worker node IP address. Like he'll be giving 192.168.12.10, followed by he has to specify this port number, node port number, that is 330,007. So now what will happen? This will connect to the service. Okay, this will connect to the service port. See, the service also has a port number. Okay, this service is right there, right? This service will have the port number 80. Okay, so what happens? This end user will connect to the service. The service will listen to the port number 80. Okay, the service is listening to the port number 80. Okay, from there it is redirecting to the target port. So your target port is your application's port number. So from there, it is connecting to this particular port number. Is it clear now? Is it clear? Any doubts till now? Is it clear? Any doubts? Hello?
No, it's
Clear.
clear.
What about others? It's clear, right?
Clear.
Clear, right? See, very simple. What we are trying to do here is, see, end of the day, your target port number should match your container port number. Okay, your target port number should match your container port number. Okay, see, in my, let's say for example, in my case, if you observe here also what I've done, I have mentioned the container port number as 80, and I have made sure the port number is 80. I mean, the target port is 80. So what is happening here is, as I told you, right? Let's say for example, we have a, I'm an end user. Okay, I'm trying to connect to my. I want to connect. I want to see that particular application. So what I'll do, when once you give the type as node port means, what will happen? If you give it as node port, then what will happen? Then which means your worker node itself will get externalized. Okay, because the worker node right now it is having that particular pod, right? So we are actually making your worker node to get externalized. I mean the pod inside that particular worker node to get externalized. So what we'll do, end user, end of the day, your end user, okay, he will just mention the IP address of your worker node, that is 192.168.12.10, which means he's connecting to your worker node machine, your node machine. He's connecting to your worker node machine. From there, okay, he wants to connect to the pod, he wants to connect to that pod. But what is actually happening here is, if you want to connect to the pod, first you need to connect to the service. Okay, so he'll be connecting to the service by giving 80. Okay, he'll be connecting to the service 80. From there, it will redirect to that particular container port, that is the target port here. So whatever the target port here, the target port should match your container port. Okay, your target port should match your container port. Is it clear, right? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay, your target port should match your container port. Only then you can able to, okay, only then you can able to look into this particular application. Otherwise, the connection failure will happen here. So make sure the target port should be exactly the same port number of what your container is using. Okay, it should be exactly same of your container is using. Okay, one second, guys. Okay, it should be same as what your container is using. Got it right? Yes. So end of the day, how this user is going to communicate is very simple, guys. I told you right. Uh, for example, we have an end user. So end user is going to the Chrome. He will just type. Since you have given the service as node port, what will happen? He has to mention the node port IP address 192.168.12 and whatever the node port IP range you have given. So I told you right, the IP range should be from 30,000 to 32,767. I'm not sure. This is the number, I guess. Okay. I'm not sure. If you want, you can Chrome it. I'm not very sure about this number. If you want, you can Chrome this number. So the node port IP range should be 32,767. Yes, it should be within this range. Only then you can able to access it. Okay. Yes. So in our case, what you're trying to do, we are actually making this service to connect to that particular pod. Okay. With the help of service, we are making the end user to connect to the pod. So how are we going to do that? It's very simple, guys. It's not that difficult here. Excuse me. Yeah. So now let's say how to run this. Now, for example, okay, I have this deployment.yaml file, right? First, what should you do here? So first thing is, I need to check whether any other pods are running. kubectl get pods. So there is no pods in the default namespace. You'll understand what is namespace when I go with namespace, guys. Right now, you don't need to scratch your head right now. Okay. Okay. Yeah, fine. So now what you need to do here is very simple. First, we need to run this deployment.yaml file. How do you run it? So you can run it by running kubectl get apply. Okay, sorry, kubectl apply, not get, sorry, kubectl apply -f, the file name you have to give here, deployment dot, I mean spelling mistake, deployment D-E-P-L-O, D-E-P-L-O, yeah. So deployment dot YAML. So when you give enter here, what is going to happen? It has successfully start creating deployment. How do you cross check this? So you can cross check it by running kubectl get deployments. Kubectl get deployment. You come to know that yes, 2 deployments are running, man. Yeah, that is the replica set. So you can even check the replica set by running kubectl get rs replica set. Yes, it is successfully running. I want to know how many pods are running. Then you can check it by running kubectl get pods. Okay, and if you want to know where is this pod running, in which worker node these pods are running, so you can run this command kubectl get pods -o wide. So when you run this, you come to know that yes, there is one pod which is running on K8 worker. Both the pods are working on same worker node. I mean in this worker node. Okay, both the pods, because I have only one worker node, right? So that's why. Okay, so don't need to get confused. If you have multiple worker nodes, obviously, guys, you know, right, the your scheduler will try to deploy the pod according to your worker node resources. It will communicate to your kubelet and it will deploy your pods according to that worker node resources. Okay, so now if you observe here, yes, both the pods are running on this K8 worker. It's good news. Okay, so now you know every pod will have an IP address. Okay, so guys, what you need to understand is we cannot communicate with the pod IP. Why? Because let's say if a pod goes down, what will happen when you, if a pod goes down, every time when a pod is getting recreated, it come up with the, every time it come up with a new IP address. So that's the biggest headache, right? We cannot communicate with the pod IP, because every time when it goes down and when it recreates it, the pod every time come up with a new IP address. So if there is any external user who wants to communicate with the pod, that actually makes very complicated things to get complicated. So that's why we go with service. Understood, right? Why we are going with service? Understood, right? Why are we going with services? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yes.
So this is very important. Okay. Yeah. So now we have created this deployment, guys. Yeah. And successfully we got to know that both the pods are running. Everything looks fine here. Yeah. Good. Next, what we'll do, we'll try to run the service. We'll try to run the service. Okay, we'll try to run the service. But guys, I think I have forgot to explain you more about the service related things. So if you observe here, so we need to understand about the services. See, let's say whatever the type you mention inside the service, right? See, let's say for example, in the spec, I mean, whatever the object, like we have mentioned the object name as service. That means you tell your Kubernetes that, hey, I'm trying to create a service. And you, in the specification, you mention the type as node port. Okay. See, according to the type, we use it for different scenarios. Okay, let's say if you're mentioning the type as cluster IP, we use it for internal purpose, like we make pods to communicate. Okay, if you're using as node port, we give the node access, we give the worker node access. Okay, then if you're giving load balancer, the load balancer itself will provide a public IP. It'll give an IP address. Okay, and with the IP address, we can make the end user to connect to see that particular application. Okay, so it depends on what kind of type you are using this. Okay, and in the selector, you know what selector is going to do, all that. So this basically service finds pods using labels. Understood, right? Service finds the pods using labels. Okay, so make sure whatever the label is there here, that should match your pod label as well. Okay, only then your service can able to communicate to your pods. Okay, yes, yes. Yeah, so we know that what is this target port is going to do. We got to know that what is this node port going to do, and we got to know what is this port is going to do. Okay, yes. Now we'll try to run the service. We'll try to run the service.yaml file. Okay, we have the service.yaml file, right? See, if you try to look into the service.yaml file, okay, I have even created this part. Okay, so in my during the installation process, I have created all this. Okay, so you can look into this part. Okay, so it's very simple only. Okay, yes. Now what are we going to do? We have to run this particular service. You can run kubectl, sorry, kubectl apply. So we want to run this particular service file, right? So kubectl apply, and you have to mention the file name, that is service.yaml. So when you give enter here, yes, service is already created. Okay, no problem. How do you check that? Kubectl get service by running get svc. So when you run kubectl get svc, you come to know that yes, there is a service. Okay, that is nginx service, which is using the type as node port. Okay, and what is the IP address? Okay, so basically the IP address is 10.100.40.45. Okay, 10.100.40.45. And which port number we want the user to connect? We want the user to connect with 3007, I mean 30,007. Okay, first we'll cross check this whether it's going to work or not. So we'll give this curl command. Okay, basically in Linux we have this curl command to check your entire, okay, to check whether we could able to connect to that particular application or not. So we can give curl and the IP address 10.100.40.45. Okay, so it has provided me this IP address followed by 30,007. Did I give properly? Oh, this is actually cluster IP, guys. Let's wait. Let's wait. Okay, this is a cluster IP. Let me do one thing. Yeah. What is this worker node IP space A? The worker node IP address is what is the IP address? 192.168.73.130, right? Yeah, let me go here. Let me go to the Chrome. Let me mention 192 dot, yeah. So we have this 192.168.73.1. Hey, one second. Let me cross check this. Did I check what is the IP address
So
of
the deployment was done on the master node or on the worker node?
deployment is done on your worker node only. See, end of the day,
Yeah,
you
because
run the commands in your master node. That's it. Okay, kubectl is just installed in your master. That's it. But deployment part, everything is going to be working on your worker node only. Because end of the day, if you look into the pods by running kubectl get pods hyphen o wide, if you look at here, you come to know where it is actually running. It is running on which node? K8 worker, right?
yeah, okay.
So that's important. Okay. Now, what is the, okay? Now let's say for example, is 130. Let me give it as, so sorry. Oh, Let me close this, guys. What is the IP address of my worker node? One second. Let me even curl it here. Okay. Let me curl it and let me check. What is the IP address of this machine? That is 192.168.73.130. Okay. Let me cross check this. What is this IP giving? Okay. Curl 192.168.73.130 colon. What was the port number that we need to connect? 330,007. Yes, we could able to connect here. See here. That is what this. Okay, so now if you observe here, let us go here. Let us give our worker node IP address. That is 192.168.73.130 colon 3007. So when I give enter here, yes, I could able to access the application. Welcome to Nginx. Okay, so end of the day, the container is this only, right? Nginx container only, no? Yes or no? See, this is how you could able to access. Clear, right? Clear, right? Is it clear what is actually happening in the background scenario? Is it clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what is
So
actually happening here is, see, let's say the end user is gone to Chrome. Okay, he has just mentioned the worker node IP address because we have mentioned the type. What is the type you mentioned? You mentioned the type as node port, which means you're externalizing the entire node itself. Okay, node port. You have mentioned the type as node port. So that is why we have to give your worker node IP address. Wherever, let's say in whichever your pod has been deployed, whichever worker node the pod has been deployed, you have to mention the worker node IP address followed by the node port IP range 30,007. Within this range, you have to give, okay, 30,000 to 32,727. During in the YAML file, you have to mention this range. Okay, so now what actually happens, So from here, I mean, my end user is going to connect to the node IP address with the port number range that will be connecting to my service port number. So in my service, what is the port number I gave? I gave the service port number as 80. Okay, it'll be, what is that service I have created? I have created Nginx service, right? If you look into my YAML file, let's say if you try to look into my YAML file, you'll get to know the clear picture of this. So in my service file, you can see here what is the service name I've given. I've given the service name as Nginx service. Okay, this service is listening to the port number 80, right? So the end user from 3276, I mean 3007, he'll be connecting to my service, that is this particular Nginx service. That service will redirect to that particular application, I mean to the pod. That is your target port. So this is how it actually works. Understood, right? Is it clear? Any doubts? Any doubts? See, I'll again answer this. See, for example, okay, the end user, since we have mentioned our service as node port, we are externalizing the node IP address, followed by, we have also mentioned the node port IP address also, that is 30,007. Okay, so what happens here is, this user will connect to our service. Our service is Nginx service, okay, which is listening to the port number as what? What is the port number that we have mentioned for the service? Yes? What is the port number we have mentioned to this particular service? Yes? Hello?
80.
80, exactly. We have mentioned the port number service as 80. From there, it will connect to the target port. So target port is nothing but your container port. So the whatever the target port number is there, that should match your container port. That is very important. Okay, it should match your container port. Okay, only if both are matching, only then what happens? This service could able to communicate to your container. It could able to make the end user to connect to your container. Okay, so that is how we got this. Welcome to Nginx. If you see this page, Nginx service, okay, this is just a Nginx frontend. Okay, yeah. So this is all about the manifest file, guys. We'll discuss more about in detail when we go with services. Okay, we'll be discussing more in detail when we go with volumes, then namespaces, then config maps, secrets. A lot of things are there. Okay, the ingress. Okay, slowly we'll understand one by one by one. Okay, so that's it for today's session, guys. In the next session, we'll be coming up with different topics. Okay, thank you all.
All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you. Bye.